So, hi everyone. I'm Jonathan MacDonald. If anyone has ever seen me speak before, um, I hopefully won't need to introduce myself that much. I'm not really a massive fan of introducing myself when I speak because as my mum reminded me when I got my Sunday Times Bestseller in the charts, that I then called myself an author, and she said, "I still don't know what you do for a living," which is amazing when your name is actually in the Sunday Times. That's not apparently enough. So I'm rubbish at self-introductions. But I think if I were to very briefly summarize what I do is I enable people to think differently, primarily around change and uncertainty. And my career has been bookmarked by working with about 40% of the Fortune 500s, which is a huge honor, but also having 9 or 10 startups, most of which didn't work spectacularly, but the ones that did really did. But the ones that worked only really worked because of the giant failures that came beforehand. and if it weren't for those muck-ups, see how I switched the swear word right at the end, then it would be, I don't think I'd have actually succeeded in anything in my life, to be honest. So that's where I kind of cut my teeth, and grew up from a family of retailers who spent 11 years trying to get things working, and eventually, after grafting pretty much 7 days a week for those 11 years, and including every single one of our relatives in the machinery of it all, it worked. And so we upgraded from a campsite, which was actually our back garden, but we always thought it was a campsite for summer holidays, to actually going to other places. Today, I'm lucky enough to have written 5 books, one of which worked, 4 of which no one's bought. Although I must admit, I kind of still think there's some content in the other 4. I'm not bitter. My therapist calls it learnings. And so now I'm honoured to spend time with people who are proactively interested in thinking differently, from a tangible perspective, rather than a esoteric way where you kind of feel as if you've been inspired, but you don't quite know why. It's kind of one of those feelings where you end up feeling motivated, but you're not quite sure in what direction. Or you say to your partner or your colleague or your member of staff, "Yeah, I heard from this person, and they made me feel really, really enthused." And then the other person goes, "In what way?" And they go, "Just enthused." I tend to try and do something slightly different. And so if that is still the answer at the end, then you should definitely get your money back from Steve Gaskell. Not that there was any money involved anyway. But so anyway, I think what we'll go through is to actually look at how maybe some of the learnings that I've had throughout my career, and where you can hopefully pick up some stuff. I did do a mindsets webinar. This one is now about Powered by Change, which is actually the methodology that I've learned over the years, and the book that I've written is of the same title. It is just basically 80,000 words of every single thing that I've learned, and I'm going to give a very concise, in the time that we have, overview of how those learnings actually could help other people. So keep notes. There'll be a lot of content. So if you feel as if it's going too fast, then that's probably intentional. It's not this is a whistle-stop tour rather than a 9-hour classroom. And so yeah, let's go into it. I mean, regardless of whether you've seen me speak or not, or regardless of whether you read any of my stuff or my blogs, I think it's important just to bookmark this by saying that this proverb, that when the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall and others build a windmill, is salient, because we are living in a time where the majority of people, and we as humans, tend to lean into our wall building mentality, which is, let's just hunker down and wait for the change to pass. And sadly, that is probably the most illogical thing to do, due to the fact that today is the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. And that in itself is something to pause for thought on. We tend to think that today's pace of change, we now feel that change is really present and happening. But even with COVID, the changes that are happening in the background or foreground, depending on your perspective, are still accelerating. And that's kind of why I often mention that success is about how well we change and failure is how much we don't. That interaction between exponential growth and responsiveness is something that I think I've probably said, one of the very few things that I'll say in almost every single presentation I ever do, because that's the way that I've observed things really working. And over time, we tend to respond slower, despite the fact that things get faster. That then provides us with a relatively high disruptive likelihood. You know, almost 9 in 10 of the Fortune 500 companies from 60 years ago aren't actually around today. And that's a bit of a shock, but nonetheless, it's one of those things that we can look at and go, well, that makes sense. But if it makes sense, then does that also mean if we're accelerating in our pace of change, if change around us is accelerating, one could argue that maybe in the next 30 years, 90% of the companies that are around today won't be around. And maybe in the 15 years after that. And it depends on how you view exponential growth. But my bet is that 90% of the Fortune 500 companies and smaller companies in the next 16 years won't be around. And ironically, perhaps, it's interesting to see some of the biggest companies in the UK now going out of business and cutting huge amounts of staff, and but also walking around local towns and villages, we sadly see a lot of companies going out of business and they're not tangible anymore, not feasible anymore. And that's not just because of COVID. Actually, it's expounded by the fact that we are still living in the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. So why do these companies stop? Why do companies actually resist change, and why do people resist change and build walls? And I've got to say that we used to be in this beautiful situation where we were in change management, and I was a change management consultant at one point. I remember that change management was we'd go into an office and say, you know what, you need to knock down those 3 walls, put those 5 desks together, and change your business card and your logo. And now we're living in the management of perpetual change. Those two things, from one-off change management to management of perpetual change, are fundamentally and profoundly different concepts. And it means that when people are actually thinking about where businesses go wrong, 52% of the time it's because of the way we think inside without any external triggers. 15% starts outside, 24% is both, 8% is beyond our control, and 1% is bad luck. And that kind of is, if we look at it in slightly more granularity, there is a significant amount of disintermediation in the value chain. And by that, what I mean is that the intermediary bodies, the agencies, the travel agencies, the hotel booking services, etc., are being disintermediated, where the value chain from far left to far right is being exponentially shortened. We also have democratization, where we have people who are able to, at any part of the value chain, play a role. So we have human public consumers being retailers on eBay and being investors on Kickstarter. And equally, we have companies who should be manufacturers or logistics companies opening retail channels on Amazon. All of this, of course, equals a significant risk of disruption, if we feel that disruption is in fact a risk. And that's something that I would like to challenge just briefly here. Over a period of time of exponential change and linear mindsets, where we end up with is a delta. And what I mean by delta is on the far right-hand side, there's this risk of disruption. And the gap between our linear growth and our exponential growth realities provides a massive risk. I should say at this point, if anyone wants to put in anything into the Q&A, I will answer every question, even if it's about Brexit or Trump. I will answer any question, apart from the North-South Korea socio-demographic and geopolitical crisis. Anything other than that, I'm yours. Anyway, moving on. If we look at the way that the DNA of disruption works, it seems to work in these 3 kind of stages. There's a fundamental change of consumption, production, and distribution on the far left-hand side. And then we have a low threat rating where we think, wow, it doesn't really matter. It's all right. It won't happen to me. And then we have an inflection point into the mainstream. So when I spoke to Hilton about Airbnb on the far left-hand side of the chart, their low threat rating in the middle of the chart ended up with a double-digit percentage loss on the right-hand side of the chart, unsurprisingly. It's the same as the taxi services versus Uber. It's the same as any other company that has watched things as a low threat going into an inflection point. Is it disruptive? Yes, if you're the wrong side of the curve. Is it an opportunity? Yes, if you choose to actually build a windmill rather than a wall. And so far, so good. Everyone on this call so far and watching this at home on video, wherever you are, will be going, yes, John, we knew that, which is great. Just making sure we have a control limit. Everyone knows that we are totally accountable for success or failure. And today's the slowest pace change we'll ever experience. So good. The risk is in the business poisons. And the business poisons are the infectious diseases that travel throughout the bloodstream of an organization, and they sound like this. They sound like, yes, but this is only in China. Yes, but we've got plenty of time. Yes, but, and you're going to love these ones. Yes, but we've never done this before, which is the twin sister, albeit an ugly twin sister, of yes, but we've never done this before. And then there's the yes, but our competitors have done it, which is the twin brother, albeit an ugly brother, of yes, but our competitors haven't done it. Those bizarre situations where you're trying to explain to a shareholder or a stakeholder that because no one's done it before, it's a massive opportunity, and they look at you blankly and go, give me proof it will work from your competitors. And you go, that would remove all competitive advantage. Or the alternative, you go in the next day and go, we found a competitor who's done exactly what we want to do. And they go, well, we're too late. These are business poisons. One of all of these, the overarching mother figure of business poisons is this isn't relevant to me. And anyone we ever see that we come across that says this isn't relevant to me, even if we're talking about something that only is happening in China, involving a technology that is banned in the rest of the world, if we think that's not relevant to us in this day, with 4.5 billion connected devices, weapons of mass communication, then we are a business poisoned organization. And we have this giant ROI here. Of course, anyone who's seen me before speak knows that my version of ROI isn't just return on investment. No, I think that risk of inaction is something that we have an absolute, we are duty bound to actually quantify. And that risk, by the way, if we actually go into the risk in terms of a granular level, 86% of innovation is low risk, and it generates around 1/3 of our profits. 14% of innovation is radical, and it generates almost 3/4 of our entire profits. That reality, according to INSEAD, of course, in France, that reality would lead us to think that we need to be innovating more. And then the business poison risk kicks in and we go, yes, but our customers have stopped buying because of COVID. Yes, but, and by the way, pre-COVID, those business poisons were still around. They just switch out the reason. Because yes, of course, the customers are shopping differently. Yes, there's an economic downturn. But what I'm going to spend the next half an hour trying to put forward an argument for is that today is absolutely the time where we can actually assess where our opportunities are and start to actually use this change as a fueling mechanism rather than as a justification for a wall. I'm going to make an argument for windmills. If I were to make an argument for windmills to you in 4 different parts, I would start with purpose, and then I would move on to people, and then product and process. And what I mean by all of these 4, very briefly, is purpose is not just about why we're doing what we're doing. Purpose is about what would happen if we stopped doing what we're doing from a fundamental, almost physiological perspective. What is it that is so resonant within us and what we do that means that that is the reason why we are here? And if we're running a business or we're operating inside a company that is a sideline project, it's something that actually we're doing because we need the cash, I absolutely guarantee you from bitter personal experience that that will never return the cash that you think it's going to. Just doesn't seem to work like that. If we do something for the money, bizarrely, the money doesn't come. If we do something because we absolutely know this needs to bloody well happen, excuse my French, tends to work more likely. And if it doesn't work, we don't feel as if everything has gone downward because we just retweak and what I would call test, learn and improve, and test, learn and improve. That's purpose. People is around the people that we are and the people we work with and our customer base. The people that we are around, intrapersonal, interpersonal, and extrapersonal. Product is also service. It is every single thing we produce, whether or not it's a product or service. and process stitches the whole thing together. If we don't have the purpose part, it ends up in confusion because no one actually really understands why the hell they should give a damn. If we don't have the people part, we end up in this resistance because the people involved don't get the purpose. And even if the product and the process is in place, they resist it because they're not the right people. If we don't have the right product, then the ability to actually put product into market is drastically reduced, ending in lack of cash flow and crisis. And if we don't have the right processes, there's giant frustration because every single thing is in place other than the process to make the bloody thing work together. So this mix is why the empowerment model of purpose, product and process is the reason it is in that order, in that way. I have through hundreds and hundreds of hours, if not thousands and thousands of hours, of either leading companies or being inside companies that are being led by strong leaders from my work with Apple, my work with eBay, my work with IKEA, the chief exec of which wrote the foreword to my book. This is the thing that I've realized is the model that works. Whether it's growing a company from 30 to 40 billion euros or growing a company from €1 to 50 million euros, it turns out that this is the modeling I've observed works the best. And at this moment, I should just point out, this is not a sales pitch for a 14 quid book. If you need the book that much, I'll send you one. This is trying to actually tell you how the modeling works from my perspective that I've observed. If we look at the model of the business marketplace from driving trends and market forces, macroeconomic forces and industry forces, there's a lot of moving parts and it's massively complex. So what I'm going to do is actually break these down into what the hell is probably happening and what to do about it without using any of the words that are on this slide, because this is not an MBA. And this is actually something way more fun and actually arguably slightly more effective. So let's move onward. As we go through the way this works, watch out for your reactions versus your chosen response. And as Viktor Frankl brilliantly said, between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And inside that gap lies our growth and our freedom. We have a choice to choose our response. So as I go through these slides, check yourself as to how much you react and go, yes, but that's in China. Yes, but I've seen this before. Yes, but we got plenty of time. Yes, but we got plenty of money. These are all business poisons. The question I would then counter is, what's your response then? If you think this is all knowledge you've got, what you doing about it? Show me. So this is the choice that we have now. Our reaction versus our response. We have changes in connectivity where we used to have a singular media network, whereas now we have a network effect. We all know that every single human on digital connectivity planet has got 120 connections on average, which means our first tier reach is 120 people. Second tier reach is 120 times 120, which is 14,400. Third tier reach is 14,400 times 120, which is 1.728 million. That's our third tier media reach of anyone with a digital device. No media channel can actually match that of your community of 120 people, which is then 120 times 1.728 million of total reach. No one can, no, there is no media channel that can actually match the changes in connectivity. The largest branding companies in the world, like Procter & Gamble, for instance, have created collaborative platforms that now make up 40% of their entire innovation of collaborations with up to 1 million other people. The largest investment platform at the moment is consumer-based investment that eclipses venture capital. 2 billion people out of the 7 billion people on the planet have mobile phones but no bank accounts. And that number is growing exponentially now. With blockchain, we have fundamental changes in transaction. And what I don't mean here is how people buy and sell. I mean transactions between any form of supply and any form of demand. Any use case, and I've played a modest hand in all of these use cases on this slide, makes an opportunity of any transactional relationship fundamentally different, with an unarguable ledger that becomes demonstrable in its security. This is not Bitcoin, this is blockchain underneath. Changes in production. Here we have from a computer animated design into a 3D printer and a piece of clothing you can wear. or Foodini, which is a 3D printer that prints out burgers, or Gnocchi, or there's entire buildings in Dubai made by 3D printers. This world could seem, what's your reaction versus your response? Ah, yeah, that's in Dubai. Ah, yeah, that's not going to taste very nice. Ah, yeah, the clothing isn't going to be very good quality. Which is exactly, of course, what Kodak said when they saw the first camera phone. Ah, it's like, it only takes 3 photos and they're in black and white and then the memory runs out. We're going to be fine. Changes in ownership, of course. We know that, you know, Airbnb is the largest accommodation provider, Uber, the world's largest taxi company, Facebook has got the most media but creates no content, and Alibaba is the most valuable retailer. They could actually buy eBay in cash and have enough to pretty much buy most of Amazon. They have no inventory whatsoever. 14% of Japanese men now would say that they never want to have a relationship with a human female. They want to have a relationship with an avatar. 14%. 5 years ago, it was 1%. 5 years earlier than that, it was 0%. What do you think it is in 5 years' time? What does that mean in terms of everything? And then we have changes in presence. Both of the people on the left-hand side are dead, and both of them were at a concert 2 years ago as holograms. The person on the right-hand side's hologram at his live show, the hologram was arrested. Our changes in sense, we all think that this holographic virtual reality world is as far as we go until you've actually experienced haptic holographics, not just wearing haptic suits, but other forms of airflow holographics that will blow your mind apart. What that means in terms of medical research, what it means in terms of the sex industry is profound. In terms of healthcare, DNA nanobots targeting cancer cells is nothing new. In the middle, we have Proteus Digital Health, digestible digital medicine, that the FDA approved, I think, in 2017. A year later, I spoke about that on stage, and people still thought I was talking nonsense after the FDA had already approved it. It's like, anyway, and 3D printed drugs, you know, that's a game changer. The changes in humanity we all know about. We understand the way that humanity can shift in terms of robotics and artificial intelligence, and also changes in safety, whether or not we actually want one of these robots in our house offering us a can of drink. Morality and changes in morality is such that what is our relationship with nature? The movement toward veganism is just a prelude, a prologue of what is actually going to happen, where we have very real moral dilemmas between how we deal with nature and also then how we deal with death. I think it's important that we consider that there's been huge changes in employment, and COVID hasn't helped that. I took a screenshot from the 30th of June of the top 5 or 6 news articles about employment, and this is the screenshot, which is interesting. So as we look at the blades of the windmill, they're addressing these changes. These aren't addressing things that you have to have a Harvard degree to understand. These are actually around these changes. And if we look at what this means to our purpose, we're at a time now where we have these sub-blades, one of which is elevation. There's always 3 sub-blades to each blade. One of which is elevation that we need to consider. And I know that some of you have seen me speak about this most recently on the webinar that I did with Steve. Well, you know that Harley Davidson aren't in the business of motorcycles, they're in the business of freedom, the experience of freedom for slightly overweight middle-aged men. You know that if Nokia had created connecting people really as a tagline, they'd have created Facebook. You know that Wonder Bra isn't in the business of lingerie, they're in the business of self-confidence. And you know that when Kodak was failing, Fujifilm was actually thinking about what their elevated purpose was, which is how light actually impacts material, and created Astlift by Fujifilm, the camera company, but actually in the business of how light damages material. Trust me, when you have an elevated perspective, your opportunity to innovate is endless. The volume of companies on the left-hand side who have an ability to think around the business they're in have a very low elevated perspective. We're in the business of a state agency. We're in the business of software as a service. Business they're actually in on the top right-hand side, there's very, very few companies. That presents a massive commercial and competitive advantage. Footnote, our ability to innovate is directly proportional to our ability to elevate. It's demonstrable, it's tangible. The second subblade is specification. Once we actually have understood our elevated purpose, how can we actually specify that into action? And why should we, actually, to be honest? Because according to Cotter and Heskett, the corporate culture and performance piece, an average organization over 11 years has a 166 revenue increase and a 1% profit increase, whereas an exceptional organization, a 682 over 11 years and 756% profit increase over the same 11 years. This is out of looking at 3,000 companies, ranging from a 2-person company to a 20,000 person company. This is the way the stats land. Empirical, mathematical stats, not kind of, oh, how much do you think you've grown as a company? No, it's actually looking at the pounds, shillings, and pence. The question is, why? Why does an exceptional organization have such a massive growth rate over a normal, a usual organization, an average organization? Well, unsurprisingly, it's actually a clearly defined, what I call specified, a clearly defined purpose that people believe in. That is the salient difference. There is supply chain logistical efficiencies, there's brand awareness in the marketplace, but you know what? Not always, not statistically probable and relevant enough. This, however, is always. All of those companies have a clearly defined purpose that people believe in. And then when HBR went in and said, no, we want to really look into that, they realized that we want to interview the people that said that they've got a clearly defined purpose. It turns out that what patterns of people want has changed. They used to want high salaries to verify their value and stable career paths. Now they want purposeful work and jobs that fit clearly into a larger context of their career. This is from HBR. What I've observed is that the people that have actually worked out what I or we love to do and what I or we are great at, and then cross-matched it with what I or we can add extreme value doing, that middle spot in the mid, that center spot is our specified purpose. And that then means we're living in a flow. Then, of course, we need to integrate it, okay? So far, so good. It's relatively logical. We have elevated, now we specified, now we integrate it. And what I mean by integrating it is, for instance, how Under Armour did this, where they actually make sure that every single person knows, therefore integrating it into their way of working, exactly what they're doing as a business, what their vision is, what their mission is, what their pillars of greatness are, what they call I will, the wills, the 4 wills, the act like a global citizen, think like an entrepreneur, create like an innovator, perform like a teammate. This is what we're doing. This is why it matters. Buy into this, integrate this into your way of working. And funnily enough, Under Armour now have actually upgraded this to an even more simple viewpoint. But I kind of like the older version. I think the older version, and judging by the stock price, my preference for the older version may be with merit. Over the 10 years leading up during this, they had something like a 2,000% stock price growth. And then the rate went down a bit. So now people. This is where we end up with our 3 sub-blades, starting with skill and will. Now, anyone who's seen me on the previous webinar or on stage will know that I tend to end with skill and will because it's kind of very, very important in terms of enabling culture. But for those of which who haven't seen me speak before, to build this up slightly, just carefully, there's a lot of issues in businesses, what I would call barrier navigations to work out. And some organizations are structured like this, with a chief idea killer at the top and a manager of new growth ideas that's vacant at the bottom. And this is how a lot of companies actually operate. I've noticed that there is a stark difference between bosses and leaders. Bosses tend to sell people or tell people the time. Leaders tend to enable people to learn how to build watches and clocks. Then, of course, we have the comfort zone where the magic doesn't happen. And there is this inverse proportional representation between our level of rational fear and our level of understanding. I have put forward over time a 6-stage process, which kind of basically gives a gateway drug to facts that says, if you want facts, then you need to actually get some predictions. And if you want predictions, this grey area of experimentation needs to be put in place. And if you're buying into the grey area of experimentation, which is exploration scenarios and projections, we need to actually get some speculations going. Despite the fact that it's highly uncertain and highly complex, if you want facts, you need to start with the top right-hand side. For those people in the organization with the will and the skill, they need to be leaders. And if they're not given the chance to lead, then they leave. Those people with less skill and will need to be learners. And if they're not given the opportunity to learn, then they leave. The people with no will and no skill should be avoided at all costs. and people with no will and skill need to be aligned with, so that their resonant purpose is integrated enough so they can actually have the willingness to do things, rather than the 74% of every workforce who actually are unengaged, or, brace yourself, proactively disengaged. Max Levchin's quote is brilliant. I'll give you time to quickly read this. I think that's a poster for anyone who's tried and tried and tried. It's a very important statement. What's even more interesting is that after PayPal, he went into various different startups that also failed. Right? So he kind of had these four what you would call failures or learnings. I like learn fast, learn often, rather than fail fast, fail often. And then you land with the PayPal side of things. And Max Levchin's an interesting case study to look into. But productive paranoia is our second blade. Productive paranoia is what Dyson didn't have. So remember where we are in our second blade here. In people, we have a second sub-blade. So Dyson don't have and didn't have productive paranoia. They watched the shark rocket enter the market, out-advertise, and oversell against all Dyson products. And Dyson still watched that going, yeah, well, it's not Dyson. And what they should have done was actually be productively paranoid and actually thinking to themselves, hold a minute, what would happen if we had our lunch eaten? What would happen if we had our cheese moved? And this is why all of the press came around to realize the same type of thing. You see, remember, when there's a change, most of us think there's a low threat rating, and then there's an inflection point into the mainstream. We have to be productively paranoid. We have to, around this low threat rating, not be paralytically paranoid. We need to be productively paranoid to actually start saying, what if? What if this happened? What if this wasn't just in China? What if this wasn't just a 3D printing, virtual reality, augmented reality thing? What if these things could happen? But of course, as we know, there is a paradox. We're supposed to also be exploiting our existing assets and leveraging them for shareholder return. When are we supposed to be doing our exploration into the new? When are we supposed to be the speedboat? Because we're an oil tanker and we can't exactly move that fast. So how do we work in duality? How do we make something that's agile and fast to explore the horizon whilst we're sitting around going at 1 degree change per year? Well, that's why in Powered by Change, I dedicate a large part of a chapter to W.L. Gore and Associates, who are probably my favorite example of a oil tanker speedboat duality. They actually have managed the paradox of exploitation versus exploration. And for those of you who ever want to do any more work on Powered by Change with me, then, and I'll speak about that at the end, then these are the type of granular details in terms of learnings that you can actually take and copy paste and apply into your organization. In terms of our third blade, which is product and or service, except it didn't start with a P, therefore I had to call it product, we have our first sub-blade of candle versus mirror. And this is all around the choice of business models that we have, because there's two ways of spreading light. One is to be the candle, and the other is to be the mirror that reflects it. In other words, you can either be the candle or you can be a mirror that enables other people's light to shine off yours. And so if we look at that as a spectrum, we can put it onto three primary different business models. There's the kind of sell and monetize directly, which is your candle. Sell and monetize indirectly, which is kind of like a merged version, middle version, a bit like IKEA that has its own stores, but also is mainly a franchise. And then you have sell or monetize via licensed third party, which is a pure franchise at McDonald's restaurant, Gold's Gym, that actually have only a third party application of things. Then we have a second sub-blade in our product blade, which is transposition. This is essentially, along with Steve Jobs' quote, that talent creates and genius borrows, where we can use or transpose or steal other people's general business model and apply it onto ours. So for instance, you could do an Airbnb if you linked surplus to demand through accessibility. That's all that Airbnb are doing. Don't think that it's about travel and stay. It's about surplus and it's about demand linked together accessibly. Anyone can do that. Don't think that you can't do a Kickstarter on your business. All Kickstarter are doing is linking belief to production through investment. That's all that Kickstarter is. How could you link belief to production through investment? And those are things that Powered by Change kind of looks into in a 4 deeper way. And then, of course, my favorite topic of this particular blade, if I was to have favorites, is mess finding. And anyone who's ever seen me speak, I've always spoken about mess finding. And for some unknown reason, I always talk about door handles that are unhygienic. I don't know why that is. I will seek help. But this, I believe that there are many, many opportunities inside things that haven't been fixed, one of which is unhygienic door handle. Where there is a mess, there's a market. And in any business, and please, in the Q&A, please, please, please test me on all of this. Believe me, it's nothing like the 30 years of learning it and then the 1.5 years with the editors of the book going, oh, yeah, but have you got an example here? Have you got an example there? Please, please, please do test me on this. Say, give me your industry, give me your company, give me your situation you're in, and tell me and ask whether or not I can tell you a mess that's in your industry. I will tell you a mess in your industry that no one has solved. Please ask me. And where there's a mess, there's a market. If you're in the biro pen business and lots of people chew biro pens, you know what one of the messes? It's not good for their teeth. Why not make a biro pen that actually cleans your teeth? Why not make a pillow that can remove makeup? Why not have a washer and a dryer and an ironer and a folder? Why not make pillows that actually enable lonely people to feel as if they're still loved? Why not make a smart earpiece translator that actually can translate languages in real time? Why not 6 packs of beer be edible so that the plastic actually can be eaten by marine life? Why test on animals when you can 3D print human skin? I haven't said one thing that doesn't exist. Not one thing. Where we need to land is between our elevated perspective and a fixed mess. Directly inside there, you can write your own checks. This isn't an Anthony Robbins type of motivation that gets you to walk across fire. This is shit tons of profit. And inside this middle of elevation and fixed mess is where the greatest successes known to man have lived. But for that, you need a process, and you need a really, really tight, slick process. And when I was writing this, and I speak around the world on these points now virtually, a lot of people glaze over when it comes to process, but occasionally in an audience, I say the word process, and the process guy or the process girl goes, yes, it's my time. And so to those watching, it is your time. Because without this, without process, you know, as far as my chart at the beginning says, you end up with this giant frustration and nothing actually works. So what we need are 3 sub-blades. The first, which is frameworks. What I mean by frameworks in terms of how we actually manage things is systems that are porous. They allow the outside in and the inside out. Systems that are rapid, that actually are extraordinarily fast in terms of their ability to flow through, and responsive, that can react and respond to changes that are happening, but we could only sense and respond to because the frameworks are porous and because they can respond quickly. Porous, rapid, responsive. When I put in the marketing framework to Nestle, which you're seeing on your screen at the moment, this was my thesis or my philosophy of process management that put in place. It's had an extraordinary impact on Nestle's marketing function. And it wasn't massively complicated because actually there was no process in place, which is always my favorite client. So when you put in a process that actually is blank to start with, it made a lot of sense to actually have external and internal, outbound and inbound porosity, and a fast flowing 30, 60, 90 day cycle. This is before the world was talking about Scrum and Agile. I should have branded it such. When we talk about our processes in terms of our attention, then I often think that we need to look very carefully at the top left, where what it gives us in terms of energy and momentum is much, much higher than what it takes in terms of access to personal and external resources. That's what we need to maximize. We need to minimize the stuff that doesn't give us very much, even if it doesn't really take very much. We need to avoid the stuff that actually doesn't give us anything and takes a lot. And we need to apply ourselves to stuff that could give us a lot, but takes a lot. Because the more we apply, the more we can actually move the top right-hand side into the top left-hand side. And I mean that in terms of what we do from a daily, minute-by-minute basis. Create a spreadsheet of how many minutes a day you're spending on what activity, you'd be surprised at how much time you magically have left. And that's one of the reasons why I think Action Coach and the default calendar and the processes that are in place that Steve runs for you as well are extremely important. And then if we actually look at how filtration works, how we can actually get rid of the noise, to denoise, to declutter, the way I do it, and anyone who wants to work to do some more Action Coach powered by change type stuff, I can actually go really, really, really granular into these type of systems. I read around 900 different RSS feeds per day that come in. I put them in 3 categories, which is business, society, and technology. I put them into competitors, innovation, macro, management, markets, models. And then the same in social, I've got macro, trends, zeitgeist, and in tech, I've got capabilities, innovation, macro, and territories. And that's how I monitor the entire world each day. So it sounds massively complicated, but actually this is my one home screen on my phone as of today. And just to prove it, that's exactly how it looks. And then this is my inbox. And this is my desktop. So the reason why I think that attention management is extremely important is because you become very, very, very efficient at getting stuff done without any noise. But there's a system that actually needs to put into place. And for that system to be put into place, you need coordination. And the coordination of what is our windmill, coordinating my purpose and my company's purpose and your purpose with our people, that is me, my business people that I'm around, and colleagues and clients, and the product of what I'm offering and the services that I'm offering and the processes that make things work. It's what I've put into these companies that I've helped over time, and also the startups that I've created over time. And you are faced with an opportunity where you can construct your windmill, which is the general thesis of Powered by Change, where every single thing actually interacts with itself. So on the top right-hand side, we've got elevation, specification, integration, but that actually can interact with our product blade and our mess finding. Our testing and learning and improving in our processes actually can interact with our productive paranoia of our people blade and so forth. And this is the interactive components of our windmill. Bear in mind, remember that I'm just about to finish soon. So if you're going to write in any questions, now's your time to do so, either in the chat or the Q&A. But for those of which wanted to look further down the line into Powered by Change methodologies and actually spend 4 lots of 1-hour interactive webinars where we can actually work together on stuff, and also be part of a secret Facebook group with only those 20 people in. There's only 20 seats available for this, by the way. And obviously a signed copy of the book and all this kind of stuff. You can be part of that if you so wish. It costs a massive £500 in total. For the 4 1 hours and the book and the private Facebook group with me as your free of charge thinker for that period of time. And so, yeah, there's 20 seats available if you so wish. And it's tinyurl.com/PBC course. It's something that if that resonates with you and you want to go into the deepest, darkest depths of insight, then please do. But if not, that's okay. Because the reason I was offering this webinar was partly because it seems to work for people over time, and there's been some significant successes, but also I'm loyal to Action Coach, and I feel that Action Coach over the last 7 years or more is an organization which I would like to support. So please do use my resources, but through Steve as you wish, because he and I are aligned. So that's where we are. That's Powered by Change. Now I'll unshare the screen and then put it over to anyone who would like to ask any questions, or anyone in the chat. So I'm just going to click on the chat, and I don't think that there's any. I remember once when I was standing on stage, and I said to the audience, I said, is there any questions? And someone actually from South Korea stood up and said, do you think that North Korea and South Korea are in some kind of genocidal geopolitical warfare situation? I said, anything but that. And I am open to any questions you have. I will answer all of them openly. Here we go. Tony says, I'm an architect. Where are the messes? Aaron can sort out your door handle paranoia. Thank you. Good. Well, that's good to know. There's only 146 trillion doors in the world. So let's make sure that we can make sure those handles are clear. My issue with architecture is, there's a number of issues, messes that I think need to be fixed. I think the supply chain of architecture still is riddled with risk of accuracy from what is actually created and conceived into what is then produced. And I think there is a beauty lag or beauty attrition that could be addressed. From speaking to the National Merchant Builder Services conferences, where they sometimes gladly, but sometimes resistingly deal with architects or are given certain plans that are approved, I think there is versioning that I've noticed that could be potentially a mess. I'm concerned that 3D modeling and our opportunities to really look at how things can be designed in imaginative ways is not as accessible as it could be. Anything that requires a significant amount of learning, a high learning curve, is something that then immediately risks losing talent at the base of the string. And so I'm wondering whether or not there is enough talent in the funnel that is under-recognized or under-realized due to the high barriers of entry. I believe that standardization is a huge issue. I think there's a lack of standards that anyone from any architectural background would have realized. I spoke at the architectural convention in Birmingham about 5 months ago, and I walked on stage and I said, I reckon there's a standard situation. Everyone went, Anyway, so I could go on. It's a pet topic. Thank you for the question, Tony. You gave me too easy one. I need a harder one. Okay. I'm a geek. I like looking at messes. Andy says, continuous improvement software and services. What's the mess? Not me. I love process. Yes, that's me. Thank you, Andy. You and me both, brother. Continuous improvement software and services. I'm concerned with duplication of work effort, duplication of storage, and lack of security therein. In the good old days, when I was speaking to the Avast chief exec, Andre, about this, and in the good old days, you'd have 1,000 viruses per month. And now we have 1 million viruses per day. We have artificial intelligence viruses that are dead set on, it's not even humans involved, dead set on eradicating the security of some of our infrastructures. And so improvement software and services has a security mess that is only starting to become aware of its reality. And I also believe that in any service that is an improvement service, the biggest risk and the biggest mess is the humans at one end or the other of the funnel, because when the humans get involved, however slick your software is, everything seems to grind to a slight halt. That's what I would say, as politically sensitively as possible. Steve, thank you, says, the purpose is often one of the toughest breakthroughs, often that aha moment, even when you're looking for it, it can be elusive. What would you advise to establish purpose? I have one overarching piece of advice, and that is, and bear in mind that in the PBC course, we would actually spend an entire hour on this one blade. So for now, working out how to describe what business you're in without using any of the words that industry normally dictates. So for instance, let's say I'm in the continuous improvement software and services game, or I'm an architect, I'm in the architectural game. Yes, what is the elevated service? What is the elevated outcome? How could I explain what I did? So someone on another webinar said, okay, I'm in the wristband business. Tell me how I can elevate. And I said, what does your wristband do? And he said, it enables people in conferences to tap in and tap out of certain places. And I said, so you're in the identity management game. And he was like, oh yeah. And I said, so actually you can run the whole thing without wristbands. So your innovation opportunity is unending. Provided someone has an identity and someone needs access, you're in the business. And he was like, so yeah. Where does one start with an industry as messy as construction? Tony, you will not relent, will you? Standards. Why can't people just, I don't know. I look at the lack of standards in certain parts of the industry in construction, and I know, and you know that you will know better than me, but there's an inertia in place, and I don't quite know how to overcome that inertia, but I wish I could help more. I feel that there's I feel we should take that one offline. And if you have a spare 500 quid, mate, get yourself a seat on the PBC course so we can actually discuss this in the private Facebook group. Steve says, what's your Oh, thank you, Christina. I've got to shoot off, but thank you very much for an informative seminar. Good. Steve says, what's the most significant coaching mess in your experience? If the most significant coaching mess is, not that Action Coach do any of this, is either cookie cutter templates of what a coach thinks that a company needs because all the other companies in that industry thinks that that's what they need. And so replicable cookie cutter fixes aren't necessarily as responsive to individual circumstances. And I know, Steve, you're a good example of how that isn't happening, so that's good. But a lot of people don't do that. I think another thing in coaching that isn't, should be improved, and that's what Powered by Change hopefully will help you guys with from an action coach and client perspective, and business owner perspective, is that constant analysis of all of the different blades of the windmill, and semi-real-time reporting on what is actually going on, and sensing our levels of will from week to week and month to month, sensing our level of productive paranoia, sensing our level of elevation, and questioning why doesn't seem to happen. Coaching and clients of coaches do sometimes end up, not in your circumstances, in a echo chamber of, yeah, is everything still going okay? Yes, it is. Are you still on track with this? Yes, it is. That's fine. And what sometimes happens is that things can fall off the edges, and that's sometimes there's some messes. Andy says, what is the biggest mess in events, online events, and marketing style events? You know what the biggest mess is? The biggest mess is that most of the events industry are attached to physical being the ultimate. And even though I believe that person to person is still, and in fact artisan in general, but person to person, human interaction is still extraordinarily valuable. I think that the legacy-based events industry and the experiential industry, who will bitterly hold on to the physical reality of things, even in the face of them seeing the productive paranoia opportunity and seeing that in 10 years' time, do you think the physical events industry is going to be 80% physical? I bet you anything that it won't be. Anything you like. Therefore, if it isn't, were you in the events industry part of that change? Or did you watch the inflection curve happen and then 50% of you go out of business and the other 50% go, oh crap, what do we do now? That's the biggest problem in the events industry. It's run by 55-year-old white overweight men who actually need a real kick up the arse. And thankfully, the digital world will do so. That's my politically correct way of saying it. Claire says, what's the biggest mess when it comes to businesses needing to train and assess their employees? And what's the biggest mess of the software industry? Training and assessment of employees, and what's the biggest mess in the software industry, is in multiple ways. One of which is that people are different person to person, and software that's scalable tends to need to be as generic as humanly possible, otherwise it won't scale. So we have a kind of a paradox between a need for individualization, but also a need in terms of scale of standardization, otherwise we can't actually scale it. So if I were in the employee training world, and I kind of am with Powered by Change, I would look for ways in which I could individualize things through some form of machine learning that can actually sense and respond to people's emotional resonance and sentiment analysis, and then tune the delivery mechanism so that it works in the language that people want. Because sometimes you need the blunt tool. Sometimes you need someone to say, this needs to improve. Other times, if you say, this needs to improve, but you've actually just finished a 19-hour shift because of X, Y, and Z, I don't think that blunt tool works there and then. And I'm giving a really, really bad example, but you can scale it from there. Zach says, sustainable fashion accessories apparel, where is the mess? What's your opinion about the Air Dior collaboration? Are you a sneakerhead? I am so much of a sneakerhead that I spoke at Adidas free of charge, so they would give me some Run DMC Adidas with the tortoiseshell, my Adidas pair of shoes. And so, yes, and so Wex Wexler from Adidas, the head of brand, actually gave me the pair in a box. So yes, I'm a massive sneaker, or was anyway. Sustainable fashion accessories, you know where the mess is? The mess is that no one realizes what you can do with mushrooms and fungi and it's proper sustainable materials that's stronger than the artificial materials, cheaper than the artificial materials. So the mess is actually market awareness and scale, because the opportunities are absolutely enormous. In organic fabrics, organic fabrication is huge. And in 15, 20 years time, we'll look back and go, God, do you remember we used to do all these horrible synthetic pieces of crap and overcharge people for thread that won't stick together, versus the new fabrication world, which actually is readily available. So yes, that's my view, and my opinion about the collaboration is that I can't speak about it because I actually have signed a confidentiality. Andy says, brilliant insight. Looking forward to the webinars. I am in. Thank you, Andy. I will see you there. Go on to PBC course, tinyurl.com/PBC course, and just leave your details, and that's cool. What's the time frame? What's the time frame for AI obliterating what we currently understand as professional services? I think that I'm not a fan of amortization. I believe that there'll be no obliterating. I think there'll be an efficiency and a streamlining, and professional services that don't that are outside of the tent and getting weed on will find it the rainfall worse than those that actually got in the tent and said, you know what, let's use artificial intelligence, or rather machine learning and algorithmic production to our benefits now together, rather than watch our legal company being basically taken over by a robot. Claire says, thank you. I have to leave for the next call. Look forward to the next webinar. Fantastic. That's great. Tony says, should I be looking to build with mushrooms? Yes, and I'm not kidding. Look up new versions of New World Fabrication. You'll know where to look, mate. Quite how you architect a mushroom, but yeah, we're being facetious. The new order of fabrication does not involve much of the old world order. Bradley says, hi, Jonathan, can you please repeat the name of the link to your course? It's tinyurl, so it's tinyurl.com, so tinyurl.com/PBC course. So there's 2 C's in the middle, one for the end of PBC and the other for the world course. But I think you can always get to me. You can Google search me, Jonathan MacDonald, and click on any link and then send me an email. Steve's got my details as well. What game do you use with Discord? I play a game called the 12 Rings, which is the hardest online puzzle known to man or woman. It's like Cicada 3301, which I found brilliant. But the 12 Rings is exponentially more difficult, and it's just insane. You sign up for the 12rings.com, it's free of charge, and you enter into a world which will blow your mind apart. Right, I think, and that's a really obtuse question by Zach Allen, by the way, which is wicked. Love to find out at some stage why you thought that I was a gamer. Oh, because you thought I was a sneakerhead. I'm a sneakerhead, therefore I'm a gamer. Man, have I fallen into a stereotype? I've actually accidentally walked myself into a stereotype. I spent 30 years on stage talking about lack of stereotypes, only to realize I am one. How meta. Anyway, I will hand back over to Mr. Gaskell, who's magically seemed to have actually tuned into this call twice, which I can only imagine you're listening and speaking in stereo here, Steve.
No, it's my better half is also tuned in and listening as well.
Got it. Well, listen, I hope I haven't gone over my overstayed my welcome here. I tried to end 1 minute before the deadline.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's been, again, as per normal, utterly insightful, at a really good pace. Anybody who's interested, obviously, I'll share the recording with a bunch of other people that have shown interest already, so that'll go out to them. And yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. Hope to see you again at some point, and thank you, Steve, mainly for giving me the faith of the platform for the last hour, and also thanks to you people here. It's not an easy time in anyone's business, believe me. You know, in 3 days in March, I watched a 6-figure amount of revenue disappear through the floor. So it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. There's this has hurt us all, and it's a very bizarre situation where I'm sitting in my flat going, what am I going to do? And I'm staring at 20 copies of Power by Change, going, if only there was a book that would help me. So I've actually had to almost literally eat my own dog food. So there you go. That's karma.
Well, let me just say one thing that you should do is not forget when you get married.
Ah, right.
Again, and I really, really appreciate the fact that you have worked this around. That really.
I must admit that the actual truth is that we didn't know when we were going to get married. And so the registry office cancelled 2 of our weddings, 24th of April, 2nd of June. And they didn't tell us about the 13th of July until after I booked this for the 13th of July. I was devastated. And at no time, ask my fiance, who's listening over the other side of the room, at no time did I say, well, can we get married and then just quickly do the webinar? No time. At no time did I say that. I was loyal. And so anyway, and thank you, Bradley, who's just said in the content. Thank you, Jonathan. Great inspiration. It's been an absolute honor, guys. And I hope to see you soon. And I will send the recording immediately to Steve. We will send the recording immediately to everyone else as soon as it's rendered.
Brilliant. Jonathan, thanks so much, and congratulations, and have a great day on the 13th.
13th, that's it. Thank you so much.
We'll be catching up soon.
Lovely. Cheers, guys. Thanks everyone. Cheers.